In this video, we'll discuss some of the key features on Chris Watts's face that point to emotional repression, lack of empathy, and the effects of murder on a person's facial expression. Enjoy.
Welcome back, everybody. So today we've got Chris Watts. If you didn't hear about this story, I think it was back in 2018. This seemingly very good and stable husband and good father ended up killing his wife and his two daughters. This story hit home especially hard for me because at the time when I found out about this story some years back, my daughter was the same age as one of his daughters that he ended up killing. So it was just a really hard story to integrate and to listen to. But there were some things that stood out about his face, and this case got national attention. The story went viral. People were following the case, and I think it was really a sobering reminder that humans can just snap, and everyday people can just snap and do the most evil things. And that's scary to think about, that humans carry that potential, but we do. So a couple key things left out about his face. First and foremost, his mouth. So in looking at his mouth, the mouth is an earth feature. The mouth relates to the five senses. It relates to empathy and compassion, being sweet and tender, of house and home. He's missing an upper lip, essentially. It looks like he only has a lower lip. And this doesn't mean that people who have very thin or non-dominant upper lips are potential killers. That's not what it means, and you can't look at face reading like that. But when you look at a person's facial features, then you look at how their life terrain has unfolded and what has gone down, you do want to start trying to connect some kind of dots, because face reading is about pattern recognition. How do we navigate this crazy adventure we call life a bit safer, a bit more? How do we be smarter about it? How do we be more efficient in assessing people and understanding our face in relation to the world? So all of these things, but this lack of an upper lip, it's almost like half of the mouth or half of those themes are missing. And so I do find it interesting and sad that this guy with that missing half of the earth element, the empathy, compassion, the family, the house and home stuff, ended up wiping out his entire family. His wife was pregnant at the time too, with a little boy. So basically 3 kids and his wife, and he wiped that out. So it is interesting. It's almost like if you look at his upper lip, the themes of house and home, he destroyed fully. It's almost as if they were non-existent. So it's weird to think about facial features in relation to how a person's mind expresses. Again, is it a direct cause? No, but you want to look at these features and pay attention. Pattern recognition, again, is the name of the game. So the other thing is he's got these hooded eyes. Okay, so when we see these eyes, it can be associated with a few things. One is people that like to scrap, people that like to fight, people that are capable of it, good at it, like to get into it, and maybe it's verbal also, but they have the ability to get into scraps, whether it's verbal or physical. Now, the other thing that's sort of like that and lying are kind of the negative side. So when we see these eyes, the eyes are seen as a gateway to the soul, right? They're a projector of like the light of the soul coming out. And so when they are covered a little bit, sheltered, it's sort of the thinking is that a person might be hiding their emotional terrain, be prone to repression, or they're somewhat of a white liar. They will tell little white lies to kind of get away with it. The positive side of these eyes when we see these is also that a person sort of like, in the same way you hold an umbrella for someone and protect them from the rain, right? You shelter them. These people oftentimes are compassionate. They have a capacity to, see themselves in someone else's shoes. They can put themselves in someone else's shoes, and they can have sort of a deep empathy and compassion. So it's kind of a contradictory thing. And I think, I don't know his life terrain completely, but the backstory around him and whatnot, he was lying at the time of the murder. He was seeing another woman. He was having an affair. And I think that was part of what caused the explosive blowout between he and his wife that led to her murder and then eventually his daughters. So in any case, we went over his mouth, went over his eyes. Now, one of the key pieces I wanted to talk about was his Shen. So the Shen is the immaterial part of face reading. It's the light that comes out of the face. It's the part of the face that you can feel and you can kind of see in a smile or in a facial expression, but you can't touch and you can't quantify it, right? It's not tangible. So we can touch bones, right? We can see the coloring. When someone has jaundice, they turn yellow, or if they get really sleepy, they get dark under the eyes. Those colors will leap out at us and it's way more visible. The Shen is kind of ephemeral. It kind of comes and goes. It's like a mist and it comes out, but we want to think, you want to look at a person's face and read their Shen when you're trying to find out if someone is lying, for one, and also if you're trying to judge a person's character. So after the thinking is, after a person has done something horrific, they've either had to kill in war, or they've maybe seen something awful, or they're traumatized by something, they will go into shock, and people will get a very dull affect over the face. And if you look at this picture, picture is from when Chris Watts is in the interrogation room after they've arrested him for the murder of his wife and daughters and his unborn child. If you look at his Shen, there is a dull, very cold affect to this man's face. And there's no getting away from something like what he did. When you've done that and you've committed that kind of crime and you've killed your own flesh and blood and your wife and the mother of your children, when you do that, there's a penalty for that. There's something that happens inside the soul of a person, and it's going to show up on the face. And I think you can see it here. You can definitely see there's something that has just washed over this guy. Interestingly, and I don't subscribe to this idea, but lots of people, when they read about this case, because this guy had no criminal history, literally just a regular guy that snapped and killed his whole family, people talked about possession. People actually were of that mind, like, how does a person go from being regular and normal to wiping out his whole family? And this guy, Chris Watts, even said in an interview, he doesn't know what happened. It's like something took over him. And I'm not saying he was possessed, but it is interesting to hear people talk about it, because when you see someone do this, our minds begin to spin as humans, like, how could this happen? But it does happen. Now, interestingly enough, too, his face from profile, which was very hard to find, but I did come across this one picture, you can see how his face kind of slants down. And we want to think of the face a lot like a landform. So when we see a face like this, it's what they call a slanting hill. And so if we think of like a slanting hill, right? If the ground and the soil gets too wet, we have a landslide. Things slide downward. And so when you see a person's face like this in relation to Chris Watts' face, this face, we have to look at the three sectors on the face. This portion from the hairline to the eyebrows, the mental sphere from here to here. This is pragmatism and practicality. And then from the bottom of the nose to the chin is our emotions and instincts. When we see a slanting hill, okay, or this slanting face, that means all of those metrics are sliding down and pooling down to the bottom of the face into the emotions and instincts. And so what that translates in face reading speak is that a person can have an overflow of emotions and instinctual responses, which means maybe overly reactive, maybe relying too heavily and that energy has become stagnant, like getting into an argument with your wife and then killing her and your entire family. So again, every person who has this feature, a slanting face, does it mean that they're a closet, waiting ticking time bomb of a killer? No. But look for pattern recognition. Look for people's life terrain. Look at their faces, then try to connect the dots. So the last piece here is his natural face, his public persona, and his inner persona. His public persona is definitely wider in its features. So that means that, in theory, people are going to see Chris Watts, or saw Chris Watts, as a relatively approachable guy. He's probably put on a good public face, but when we see that inner persona, highly narrow, considerably narrower, which is aligned with the wood element. We're talking anger, aggression, irritability, reactivity, very close set eyes too, which means usually hypercritical, hyper-focused, and really has an attention for detail and maybe can obsess over the small things. So I don't know what was going on in the mind of Chris Watts, but from reading about him and hearing about his upbringing and whatnot, very difficult childhood, very controlling mother, and very likely emotionally repressed. And with a face like this, an inner persona like this, with these very strong wood features, with these hypercritical eyes, you don't want repressed emotions. So you want to think, just because a person has these features doesn't mean they're going to become a killer. But if you look at their life terrain, how they were raised, then you have to start thinking about the face in relation to that. So you have this face, then you have these lifestyle factors that come in through your upbringing. And so the container of your face is going to house those things, and that can be a pressure cooker. And I think with Chris Watts, it was, and he blew in the worst way possible and ended up wiping out his whole family. So that's my read on Chris Watts. Very sad story. You can check out lots of videos online if you want to read about the story, but these are my thoughts. And if there's someone else you'd like me to read, please let me know. Thanks a bunch.